As we draw this series to a close, my hope for all of us is that we might instar. Like a caterpillar journey coming to an end, may we discover a new beginning on the other side. In the first 3 episodes of Transitions and Transformations, we explored the in-between places, those times when we find ourselves in that space between where we were and where we are going. Have you ever thought about a caterpillar's journey? We know a caterpillar enters a stage of life when it wraps itself tightly into a little pod, and a few weeks later, something very different emerges from that sac. But what exactly happens in that cocoon? How can one explain this transition and transformation of a caterpillar into a butterfly? The best explanation I have heard for this transition and transformation comes from Rebecca Solnit. Hello and welcome to Gifts of the Completed Life. My name is Lynn Barger Elliott, and today is the final episode of the series Transitions and Transformations. Today we will explore and reflect upon the time when we are no longer standing between the tides, in that in-between space in our lives. Rather, we have emerged, and when we do so, we have been transformed. We have become a different person. As we explore and reflect upon this theme of transformation, I invite you to think for a moment of the most beautiful butterfly you've ever seen. Perhaps in your backyard, a botanical garden, or a butterfly house at the zoo. And I'd like to ask a question. What do you know about cocoons? What do you know about how that butterfly came to be so beautiful? I remember taking my children when they were young to the Brookfield Zoo outside of Chicago. We would stand in front of the wide glass case and stare intently at the hundreds of thumbnail-sized green pods pinned so delicately to a long horizontal wood pole. We'd wait, hoping to see the tiniest movement, the slightest hint of chrysalis, of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. Have you ever studied a cocoon? Rebecca Solnit has. Perhaps her name is familiar to you as the author of more than 20 books on topics like feminism, indigenous history, social change, and hope. It is in her book, A Field Guide to Getting Lost, that she describes what happens inside a cocoon as instarring. That's a lovely word, isn't it? To instar. Solnit writes that to instar implies something both celestial and ingrown, something heavenly and disastrous. Then she suggests that perhaps change is more often like this, as if a star was buried within us, oscillating between near and far. Solnit had her own studying a cocoon moment. She describes a visit to the butterfly garden at the Conservatory of Flowers near her home in San Francisco. Behind the pane of glass, she writes, were narrow wooden planks with platoons of future butterflies lined up in long rows. And as she leaned in and looked more closely, she could see that the cocoons had ever so subtly taken on the shape of the butterflies inside. As she continued to observe, she noticed that some even appeared to rock back and forth as though stirred by a faint breeze. And then she tells how she watched in awe as 4 butterflies began the work of emerging from their cocoons. They came out, writes Solnit, with wings packed down like furled parachutes. So what happened in that moment when the cocoon had taken on the shape of a butterfly? How did that beautiful creature come to emerge with wings like furled parachutes? What happened inside the cocoon was what I would call a transformation. At the Completed Life Initiative, we invite people to consider the question, what does a completed life look like? This could be interpreted to mean, how do we want to finish our life at our death, when our story ceases to go on? But the concept of a completed life can also be interpreted as a life that offers a series of complete moments, as Aristotle once described. Moments that lack nothing, moments that are full in and of themselves, full of joy, full of laughter, love, and I would like to suggest, full of transformation. It is in that moment when something new is born, when we are changed, in many cases forever, that transformation occurs. And this is what Solnit calls instarring. Because here's the thing. I did a little research on caterpillars, butterflies, and cocoons. And what I discovered was a little shocking. I guess I never really thought about it. But in the process of transforming from a caterpillar to a butterfly, there's no hybrid moment, no time when the creature is half one thing and half the other. Scientists have actually studied this, and when they peered into the cocoon, they saw that a caterpillar must actually cease to be, shall I say, before a butterfly can emerge. In other words, the caterpillar's story must end for a new story to begin. And that's instarring, or I would suggest a complete moment, celestial while ingrown, heavenly while possibly disastrous, as if a star was buried within us, oscillating between near and far. I wonder, have you ever had, or perhaps you are experiencing now, a time of instarring? A time when one thing, one aspect of your life is ceasing to be. And have you considered that ending might be happening so something new can be born? Might you be the cocoon? Or perhaps you are in the chrysalis stage, preparing for that moment to emerge, transformed and entirely new. This past weekend, I was in a used bookstore and once again found myself peering at an object behind a pane of glass. Instead of being a cocoon pinned to a wooden rod, it was a first edition of The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Carle. Can you guess how much it was? The price tag said $6,000. Do you remember that beautiful book? It's the story of a little caterpillar who eats and eats for an entire week. On Monday, he ate through a red apple. In the days that followed, he ate through 2 green pears, 3 purple plums, 4 red strawberries, and 5 oranges. On Saturday, he ate through foods like chocolate cake, salami, and watermelon. That night, he wasn't a little caterpillar anymore. He was a fat caterpillar who then built a small house for himself called a cocoon. He stayed inside for more than 2 weeks, and then he nibbled a small hole and pushed himself out. I was surprised, as I have been so many times before, as I turned the page and saw the beautiful and extraordinary colors of the butterfly that emerged. Its orange and red and green and purple wings splayed magnificently across 2 pages. And it occurred to me, that's the hope and the promise of Instarring, of a complete moment of transformation. The caterpillar that entered the cocoon was no more, but in its place was something, as Solnit writes, otherworldly, celestial, growing almost imperceptibly, rocking near and far, becoming something entirely new and more beautiful than ever could be imagined. Thank you for joining us for Gifts of the Completed Life, Transitions and Transformations. And thank you to Zoe Wilshire, the editor of Completed Life podcasts. To listen to other episodes of Gifts of the Completed Life or our other podcast series, Voices of the Completed Life, you can find us on your favorite podcast platform or visit our website, completedlife.org. Go to the Programs tab and scroll down. We would love to hear from you. Please send us your reflections, comments, and ideas of gifts or your stories of the completed life by emailing us at info@completedlife.org.